everyone, and thank you for tuning in. Welcome to First Global's fourth STEM Talk that's part of the programming for the 2021 First Global Challenge, Discover and Recover. My name is Emery, and I'm moderating today's talk. As we learn from today to build a better tomorrow with STEM, we're hosting a variety of sessions throughout the season to learn from STEM enthusiasts about using these fields to discover and recover. Today, we're focusing on education. So joining us today, we have Dr. Winston Soboyejo, also known as Wole, Senior Vice President and Provost at Worcester Polytechnic Institute. He's also a mechanical engineering professor at WPI and a materials scientist whose research focuses on biomaterials and the use of nanoparticles for the detection and treatment of disease, the mechanical properties of materials, and the use of material science to promote global development. Prior to joining WPI, Dr. Wole was a professor in mechanical and aerospace engineering at Princeton University for approximately 17 years. In addition to his achievements in engineering research and academic leadership, he's also furthered international development with a track record in building global research and educational partnerships. Today, we'll be hearing his insights on the educational challenges that have resulted from the COVID-19 pandemic and what we can do to combat them to ensure quality education for all. It's great to have you here with us, Wole.
Thank you, Amory. It's a pleasure to be here.
So thank you again for being here. And we're just going to jump into the first question that we have for you, just to get to understand, what does your day-to-day work look like as the Senior Vice President and Provost at WPI?
Thanks, Amory. You know, I'm an early bird, which means that I wake up early and I sleep early. And so a typical day for me begins around 5 o'clock, which is my thinking time, where I basically have a cup of coffee and start thinking about things that are on my mind. And so this is precious time for me, just to imagine and to solve problems of various kinds in a solitary way. And so that ends usually around 7 o'clock when I interact a little bit with my family. And then I start really working for WPI, which is a complex university. And a lot of it is to do with how we work out strategy to provide our students with the very best education that we can give them. And we think about ways in which WPI can make a contribution to the world, not just through research, but through projects that we engage in. But a lot of it is about working with people to achieve things that make a difference, not only to the school, but to the world at large. So my day is often spent working with people, solving problems, and trying to deliver the impact of WPI. As an early bird, though, I have to also tell you that anything I say after 7 p.m. must be taken with a pinch of salt. I tend to sleep early because I run out of energy, but I spend the last part of my day interacting with my family and usually falling asleep without having any control over myself.
That's so funny to hear. I really wish I was an early bird, but unfortunately, it sounds like sometimes I'm just heading to bed right when you wake up. But you're talking about how, it's really important for you and for WPI to try to make these programs to make the world a better place. So we know that WPI has been a leader in project-based learning approaches for decades. And in 2020, through the help of your leadership, WPI launched a new school, the Global School. Can you tell us a little bit about the new programs and why you felt it was the right time to launch the school?
In the middle of the pandemic, one of the things we realized is just the global nature of the world around us really brings things that happen remotely into sharp focus across the world. And so this was a time when the world had to solve major problems. And for WPI, with our project-based approach of working with partners across the world, we saw this as the right time to really bring a school that brings partners from across the world to work on projects that solve the big problems of our time. So problems of global health, problems of STEM education, problems of climate change, and problems of development are problems that affect all of us. And they're problems that motivate the use of STEM in problem solving. And so what the Global School does is to enable us to bring together the different fields required to create the solutions to those problems, to prepare the problem solvers of tomorrow with the STEM backgrounds, but also the knowledge of the world and the different cultures and contexts in a way that addresses these challenges. And so we've started the Global School, we've just launched, and we've just also hired a new dean to really help us grow this vision with distinct educational programs, with collaborative research that spans multiple fields in a way that we hope will produce not only the solutions of tomorrow, but the problem solvers of tomorrow.
That's amazing to hear, and also talk a lot about the multifaceted ways in which we must seek to solve these problems. And it's very much in line with what First Global's mission is with promoting STEM education. And with that, I also wanted to get into the questions that are submitted by First Global teams. So our first question comes in from Team South Africa, and they ask, what inspired you to become a professor in mechanical and aerospace engineering?
You know, I was lucky enough to come from a family where my father was a professor. And he was a professor at the University of Lagos in Nigeria. And I remember at the age of 4, he would take me into his office and sometimes into his classroom. And I would watch him tell jokes to students and interact in such a fun way with the students that at that time, as young as I was, I just couldn't imagine doing anything else than kind of being in this fun environment where you're interacting with young people and having a lot of fun, explaining things and doing things that were very creative. So at that time, there was some of the leading academics in Nigeria who were in that unit at the University of Lagos. And I was inspired like crazy to want to be like them. The only problem is I wasn't sure if I was going to get the grades, right? Because it was such a big thing. But it certainly gave me the inspiration to want to be like that one day. And as I went through school, I never went beyond that image of wanting to be in the classroom, wanting to interact with students, and to be in a university environment where I could have the freedom to pursue my interests.
Yeah, I completely relate to that. And I love this question because it kind of reminds me of me as well, and hopefully wanting to go into academia someday as well. Thank you. And I think it's really amazing to hear about how people are inspired to not just do the job or occupation that they end up doing, but then what also they end up researching in that field or committing to. So one of your research projects examines the use of nanomaterials for targeting and treating cancer. So we have this question from Team Suriname. What made you want to research this area? And do you have any positive developments to share?
No, this is an important question and very personal. So in the 90s, some members of my family had cancer. And I remember sitting with them in the hospital with all the uncertainties after a cancer diagnosis, being worried to death about what was going to happen to them. And at the time, I was working mostly on aerospace materials, driving the frontiers of aerospace. And I realized that actually I needed to change the focus of my work to address some more pressing human issues. At least that's the way they felt to me. So this was in the sort of early to mid 90s. And I didn't know how to do it. But gradually over time, as I watched them go through this, I was inspired to want to do something in cancer. And so I started talking to doctors. I started talking to people who've had cancer and trying to figure out what I could do. And through those, I found out that the two big issues are detecting the cancer early and then treating the cancer in a way that is not so harmful or toxic to humans. And as I kind of delved a little deeper, I realized that you could use nanoparticles to design target structures that can be injected into the body and attach to tumors in a very specific way. And so I started working on the design of those nanoparticles in the early 2000s. And we were able to show that those nanoparticles enrich the MRI imaging. And then I realized, especially with breast cancer, and then I realized that you could use the same idea to carry liquids, basically drugs, to the same receptors. And so most recently, I started working on using targeted drugs to target specific receptors on the surfaces of breast cancer cells. And because the receptors are specifically targeted, you can actually shrink and eliminate the tumors with much lower concentration of drug. And so in some of our most recent publications in Nature Scientific Reports, you'll see that we've shown that you can eliminate the tumors with lower concentration of drug with much lower toxicity effects. So the most recent work has now reproduced those results. We've developed targets not only for breast cancer, but also we've developed targets now for prostate cancer and cervical cancer using similar ideas. So we're now in the process of going to human trials on the breast cancer work. And so for me, this is very exciting, right? Because it takes a lot of time before you get to the point where you can do this. And it's also very exciting to think that hopefully in the next few years, we have the opportunity to actually go from an idea that was motivated by a problem to actually seeing the fruits of our work accrue to people over time.
Yeah, congratulations and thank you on those breakthroughs, because I certainly know my dad also works in the pharmaceutical industry. It takes so many years. COVID and the vaccine, that's like its own thing, but typically takes literally like decades sometimes to get a drug onto clinical trials and onto the market. So that's amazing to hear about.
Thank you.
We also want to hear about, in your opinion, this question is now coming from Team Bosnia and Herzegovina. In your opinion, what STEM tool is or could be the most valuable for the future of education?
I thought about this, and I think it's the cell phone or the computer. And the reason for this is that access to global information combined with imagination and teamwork, I think are the keys for success today and most likely in the near future. And it's amazing what you can find with a search on your cell phone in terms of information that's distributed across the world. And if you're not really doing serious computation, it's amazing what you can do with that information in educating yourself and in supporting your own efforts. But if you want to add the possibility of doing some modest level computational work, then I would say that the laptop is tremendously important. And with a laptop, you can do computations in multiple ways. You can do AI, you can do machine learning, you can do knowledge discovery, and just so much that empowers you to make your own unique contributions. And so I really see those tools as becoming some of the basic tools that can be shared across the world in a way that levels the playing field for doing discovery, for doing innovation, or for simply just doing analysis that supports the kinds of STEM breakthroughs that we need.
Yeah, certainly. There's a variety of things that you can do with the laptop and what you can research on the internet. And I think a challenge of that, though, is also a lot of information on the internet that's not accurate. And so another, I think, really important tool would just be like having literacy on that, like news literacy, as well as data analytics literacy. But yeah, speaking of like such challenges, in addition to that, there's a question coming from Timo Mon asking you, as a professor and research in STEM, you've probably faced many challenges and roadblocks. So can you tell us about a challenge in your work that you were able to overcome?
I thought about this, and I would say that at the very beginning of my research career, when I was a PhD student at Cambridge University, my first set of experiments didn't work. And in fact, they didn't work for about a year and a half. And it took every ounce of effort in me to overcome the daily challenges before I got to the point where those first set of experiments eventually worked. And so I say this because for many people, they would give up, when things don't work out at the beginning. And in that case, what I learned was the value of perseverance and dedication. And those are important in the lives of anybody that wants to make contributions to STEM. And so as I look back, that foundational experience of learning to overcome the doubts, the challenges at the beginning, and pushing through until eventually you are able to succeed was the key to preparing me for the rest of my scientific and technological life.
Yeah, that's such a valuable lesson. And it really reminds me of that one Thomas Edison quote. It goes something like, oh, if you fail 1,000 times and you now know 1,000 ways how not to do something as well. And that's, I think, yeah, like you said, a good way to frame if you've ever felt like there's a setback and to keep persevering. And now, speaking of your research projects, Team Japan would like to know, which research project of yours are you most proud of?
For me, I like to solve problems. And I've been very blessed to be in an environment where I can do research that solves problems in health, in water, in energy. But I've actually chosen one that might surprise folks, which was a project I did in Impala, Kenya, which was a project that provided solar energy to a rural village in ways that taught me many, many things. And so I just thought you just provide solar energy. Turns out that's not so simple. You need to understand the people. You need to understand their cultural context. You will need to understand their energy budget. And you need to understand their needs in a holistic way. And by investing time in understanding the people in the village and their needs as a community, we were then able to design and develop and test a new kind of solar cells with only 2 to 3 watts of power that could harness enough energy and provide 10 to 15 hours of light for people in this rural village. We also were able to develop an economic model that allowed them to pay for this over time in ways that created a sense of ownership. With the same kind of an approach, we developed also community-based approaches that enabled them to have a local clinic that was a mobile clinic that then went around on camels to serve a community of 250,000 people in the Laikipia district in ways that use community medicine to go from one station to another, providing vaccine preservation in refrigerated systems that were solar powered, in ways that created the health solutions for that community in ways that they could afford. So that particular project, which is, you can find it on the web, is the one that I'm most proud of because it touched the lives of so many people. And the way that the technologies were developed were informed by not only my own preconceptions of the technologies, but also by how local people use technologies. And so when we initially started designing many of those systems, we designed them like aerospace systems for NASA going to space. And those were not ergonomically compatible with the people. And so what we then had to do was to actually go into those communities and study how they use technology, and then use that understanding to guide the design of the solutions. And those solutions eventually then utilize flexible solar panels that were cutting edge at the time, easy to mount systems that were motivated by how rural people do things, to create ergonomically compatible solutions that were then easy to use and sustainable in the context of those places. So for me, this is the project that I'm most proud about because it touched the lives of so many people. And it also showed the value of combining the knowledge of all people to create solutions that are sustainable in different communities.
Yeah, certainly. And it seems obvious how STEM comes into the part of trying to like create the solar panel technology. But I wanted to ask you also, like, how do you think that STEM contributed to, like you were talking about, being able to understand like the culture and knowledge gained from the local people as well?
So the context of using STEM to meet the needs of people requires what I call cultural ergonomics. Otherwise, if you just create a STEM solution without making those connections, often what you do is you create a STEM solution that nobody wants to use. And so to frame the right questions that address the needs of the people, what I found was that we needed to interact in those communities and not presume that we knew what the problems were just based on how we saw them from the outside. Once we were able to frame that, we also needed to know what the people valued to then create the context of how to introduce the solutions to meet the needs and also the values of those folks. Once you do that, by the way, the STEM is still STEM. You still have to figure out how much power you need. You still have to figure out how much energy you need to store. But you can orient your solutions to meet those needs in a very focused way. And you can also test them within those environments. So it's still STEM, but it really thinks about the people first. Otherwise, you create solar panels that nobody can afford, or you create structures that don't fit well ergonomically into their own way of doing things. So eventually they reject them. And so what I learned from this is to really understand the people and the problems that you're trying to solve, not just imagine them. And then to be robust enough and creative enough in how you approach them, such that you can then identify the most sustainable solutions that can meet those needs in a way that still requires you to have a mastery of STEM.
Yeah, and it sounds like you're bringing forth this idea of like making sure you have like a holistic approach to solving the problem. I just have another follow-up question because I really like asking guests that we might have on our podcast as well, like what advice, in addition to maybe this is also good advice, but what other advice might you have for students who are interested in pursuing a career in STEM?
I think the most important thing is to, first of all, develop a nose for interesting problems. So the way I see anyone that's interested in STEM is as you walk around, you should be like an artist that's looking to be inspired by the world around you. And you should be curious about that world and inspired by that world. And as you get that, that leads you to interesting problems that you want to approach. They could be problems, in my case, of energy or of health or water. And then you start thinking about really digging deep to figure out what the real problems are, not just what the initial perceptions are. So that requires you to talk to people. It requires you to get more information, to really figure out what are the well-posed problems that you can solve. Not just what are the well-posed problems, but what are the well-posed problems that you can solve. And ultimately, you shouldn't just think it's all about money. It's really about ideas and working collaboratively with people and thinking about the niche that you can bring to a field. And this has put me in a situation where I can solve problems, not working as an individual, but working as a team in a way that has made my life very rewarding. And so if you're interested in STEM, I encourage you to pursue your curiosity, your interest, learn how to understand, identify problems, and also learn how you work in teams, not just by yourself, to solve those problems. And the reason is, in many cases, you often will not be able to solve every aspect of the problem, but if you form effective teams, you can. And so my suggestion to people who want to pursue STEM is build these aspects of yourself, and of course, learn about STEM. So, but do so driven by your own curiosity, not just because you're pursuing this at school.
Yeah, another additional advice I got, at least from what you were saying, is also like learning to work with people. And that's something that First Global really likes to emphasize as well through our First Global Challenge. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think this is one of the most amazing things about First Global, because it encapsulates within the approach, in my mind, all of the things you need to succeed. You know, one of the things that I found, and I asked my father this when I was a boy, I said, you know, Dad, what does it take to be a great engineer? And I expected him to say, oh, be good at math or physics. He didn't say that. What he said was, you need to learn how to work in teams. And I asked him that question 3 or 4 ways. And it was always, you need to learn how to work with teams. And this is somebody that has developed designs for the tallest building in West Africa and done major engineering projects, who kept on saying, you need to learn how to work in teams. And that's what I've also learned in my own career as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think as well, something to consider, you know, we want to work in teams, and it's like important to care not just about like yourself and like in the process of that, you know, working with people. And also I think caring about issues that are, you know, global, right? So a question that we have coming from Team Argentina is about access to quality education, you know, having these education systems within countries, but also just globally. So historically speaking, access to quality education has required a ton of economic and human resources. But in an age where new technologies can break geographical constraints, how can the educational systems adapt so that everyone can access a quality education?
You know, one of the biggest opportunities we have today is that information is digital. And so what that means is that students all across the world can have access to information in a way that can enrich how they approach knowledge and how they access and use knowledge. But I think beyond that, we need to have what I'll call pedagogical approaches that are good not only for the smallest 5% who learn in one way, but for 100% of the population that can contribute in multiple ways. And so having approaches to bring in knowledge together that are accessible to all people, really important. So one of the things I like about project-based learning is everybody can play a role in a project. And some people bring different instincts to the knowledge that's globally available. And you now start realizing that we can create communities across the world where people have not just access to digital knowledge, but they can use that knowledge in teams to solve problems that are local and sometimes also global. And so for me, this framing of looking at the opportunities for digital knowledge combined with project-based approaches that allow all people to learn, really crucial for the future of STEM education. And I would really love to see, as we go forward, opportunities to increase the access to digital information and the participation in what I would call project-based education with elements of social constructivism that mean that you learn, you make mistakes, you correct yourself, and you discover in a more profound way, such that you can develop quality STEM experts across the world, across multiple ranges of capabilities in ways that serve communities across the world. So for me, this is really critical, and I'm engaged in one or two projects where we're trying to develop those tools and opportunities for students across the world.
Yeah, and I think another tool, I guess you could call it that people are really interested in these days is artificial intelligence. So a question coming from Team Sudan is about how do you think the field of education will be impacted by AI advancements?
You know, AI in my mind is one of the most exciting areas of opportunity for not just education, but for all fields. And so I was thinking the other day about the application of AI to my cell phone and my access to music on the internet. And as I use it, it adapts the systems that I use to be optimum for me. And so when I start screening music, it even learns how I listen to music and adapts gradually to what I do. In the same way that this has been done for music and for my car with my navigation system, I believe that this will be adapted for education of individual students. And with students with different learning types, as we present information to them, I think the educational tools that will be wrapped up in everybody's cell phone will also enable us to provide systems that adapt to learning needs of different students in a way that will guide the future of education. And I think this is only just the beginning. I also see the opportunities in AI as being opportunities that can be translated across multiple languages and multiple cultures in a way that adapts to multiple contexts. And so I would really love to see, as these tools develop, maybe teams from Global First or First Global that really begin to think about AI as a tool to translate, of course, into multiple contexts in ways that optimize access to education and access to information within this context.
Yeah, I think AI is like super fascinating in the way that it is adaptable. So personally, I'm a philosophy major in college, actually, and we've talked about the maybe like ethical challenges that AI might bring to the table. I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on that, or what ethical things you might think it'd be important for people to keep in mind when, or if they start doing research in AI.
Oh, I think as we start using people's information, right, without any ethical framework, there are serious risks on infringing on people's liberties and people's rights in multiple ways. So we really need to develop an ethical framework for how we approach this, the rights of people and the rights to privacy in ways that need to have informed consent. So I think AI evolving without that ethical framework could lead to serious challenges to society. And even in places where we don't have these in place, I think those that have the knowledge of AI should have some framework of ethical thinking that will guide behavior. Otherwise, we're very likely going to lead ourselves to a 1984 situation where all our information, private or otherwise, is held by a few companies that can manipulate us using this as a context. Having said that, I do think that with the right ethical framework, we can develop some of these opportunities into a realm where knowledge is customized for people and how they learn. And if we do so in an ethical framework, we can create a world in which people are informed by knowledge that they can use to solve their own problems.
Yeah, I agree. Super awesome to hear about like all the benefits. And then like the way to optimize those benefits is also keeping in mind those ethical challenges. So the final question that we've written down for you today comes from Team Vietnam. Some countries don't see STEM education as a core part of the school's curriculum. What can we as students who love STEM do to create learning opportunities for ourselves while we wait for governments and education systems to catch up to the importance of these fields?
I think the important thing is to network. So form networks that are local, form networks that are regional, and become part of global networks. And so I think of First Global as a global network where you have access to information, you have access to like-minded people that are trying to do things that really build on the excitement of STEM. And then you also need to, in my opinion, have access to certain tools that are global, that enable you to promote or develop your interests, become part of innovation competitions, become part of hackathons and Olympiads that network people together in a way that can facilitate your own growth. And then I want you to always remember that there are 3 stages to a good idea. 3 stages. And you hope you live long enough, which you will, to see these 3 stages. In the first stage, very few people can see this. And it's kind of painful because you can see it. You can feel it, smell it. But very few people can see it. But you keep talking about it to those around you. And you get into the second stage after a while when they've listened to you and they start saying, yes, maybe there's something in this idea that you have that might be worth pursuing. And then one day, hopefully, a few years later, they start saying, of course, it was their idea all along, right? Now, it takes a while before you get to that point. And I can assure you that if you're a STEM enthusiast, you will go through this. Now, what's exciting is this. If you look at the world today, all those STEM folks that have gone through this rule the world. If you look at Microsoft, if you look at Facebook, if you look at all the major tech companies, they're managed by people like yourself who went through this process over time. And they were able to take their knowledge of STEM and apply it in different ways. And I could tell you, as we look at the extensions of AI, robotics, health solutions, all sorts of solutions to the world in places like Vietnam, Korea, Sudan, wherever you are, the trend is going to continue. And so be in a network, be positive, look to use your knowledge to solve problems, and don't just be limited by the limited perspectives of people or governments today. Open up your imagination to that larger world in which your role as a STEM enthusiast can really lead to transformations in your community.
Thank you so much for that. With that, we have all of the questions already asked for today's STEM Talk. Thank you so much, Wole, for taking the time to speak with us. And I just want to give you a little bit of extra time in case you had any final remarks.
I do have just one thing I want to say before I close. And it's important because as I look back on my own life, I realized I was a guy who never really had a career plan. but I followed my passion. And my passion was the love for STEM and how I could try to use STEM to solve problems and make the world a better place. And it's been really exciting to see that you can be inspired by your environment. Like I grew up seeing certain problems. And then I asked the question, why not try to solve those problems in whatever ways that I can? And I have found that in trying to work with others, I can do things that are more than what I can do myself. And this is a huge lesson that I find to all of us, to be inspired by our environment, to really want to solve problems that matter to us, and to realize that by working with others, you can really solve those problems that matter to you and do things that are much greater than what you ever imagined. And so for those of you across the world that are considering a lifetime in STEM, I strongly encourage it. It's been the most rewarding thing that I have done. And I think it's been the most fulfilling thing that I could have done to try to serve the world.
Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone else who's tuning in and listening to this. And we look forward to having everyone listening in on our next talk.
Great. Thanks, Amari. Thanks to the First Global team.